Forge, Chapter 58. 2 days after we poured the key, a group of Oneida warriors arrived at camp. There, at the request of General Washington, they brought with them bushels of corn, for they had heard how hungry our soldiers were. One Oneida woman came too, name of Polly Cooper, to show how to make a good soup from the corn in the manner of her people. His Excellency and General Knox were grateful for the corn, but they were most excited by the weapons. The warriors had brought their bows and arrows in addition to their muskets. In the time it took to load and shoot a musket once, a warrior could shoot 4 arrows or more. When I heard this discussion in the dining room, I thought to myself that it would be smarter to teach the entire army in the way of bows and arrows. General Greene left for Fishkill Fort the same day. Bellingham had tried his best to convince the general he should accompany him, but he was foiled, to my relief. If he had gone, he could have taken me and left Isabel behind to serve the ladies. Any separation now would be disastrous. In her husband's absence, Mrs. Greene arranged for a supper to keep her amused. Lady Washington loaned her Hannah, His Excellency's cook, for the occasion, which freed Isabel to put on her good blue short gown and clean skirt and serve the table with me. All of the windows in the dining room were open, as the evening air was warm instead of sour-smelling soldiers. The wood smoke, the room was filled with odors, roast beef, pickled beets, baked onions, and rose water worn by Mrs. Greene, the freshly powdered wigs of the gentlemen. Mrs. Greene had requested extra candles to light the table and fresh flowers in a bowl at the center of it. Despite the setting, Bellingham's mood was foul. Whilst the others laughed and conversated, he mostly drank wine and scowled. His nature was keenly sensitive to slights, and he took being left behind by General Greene a bad omen. I avoided his gaze. We served the meal, which was much grander than anything ever prepared by Mrs. Cook. The ladies tried to steer the talk away from the war, but the gentlemen, most of them wearing officers' uniforms, always brought it back. New recruits were pouring into camp and needed time to learn the fighting drills of Baron von Steuben, which provided a series of funny stories about Baron's teaching techniques. A young fellow who was aide to General Washington waved Isabel to the table to serve him more biscuits. He took 2 from the plate that she held. Did your girl bake these? He asked Bellingham. I should say not. Isabel can't cook to save her life. Mrs. Greene rapped the back of Bellingham's hand with her folded fan. Do not disparage the talents of young Isabel. Her understanding of the needle is far superior to any that I've ever met. Isabel backed up, set the platter of biscuits on the sideboard, and stood with her hands folded in front of her, her face empty. Knowing how much you appreciate her skill, Bellingham says, makes it more of a pity that she will not join you in your household. Miss Shippen laid down her fork. You're not buying her, Catherine? Sadly, no, Mrs. Greene sighed dramatically. Nathaniel says it would be imprudent with the war still on. Well, then, Miss Shippen said, I have a friend in Virginia who could use a seamstress. Bellingham nodded. Your concern is touching, madam, he said as he removed his plate of bones and gristle. But I've already concluded the matter. Colonel Gilpin of Maryland has purchased Isabel as a wedding gift for his new bride. Mrs. Greene pouted. Please tell me she won't be leaving until I do. Isabel placed a dish of gooseberry tart in front of Bellingham. I am afraid she must, Bellingham said. The colonel has arranged to send the wagon of his belongings home this week. Isabel shall be going with it. There was a knocking on the front door, but I was too stunned by Bellingham's words to respond. Isabel did a better job at concealing her thoughts than I did. She collected the dirty plates from the other gentlemen. After she stacked them on the tray by the door to the kitchen with her back to the table, she quickly wiped her eyes on her loose neckcloth. She sniffed once and took a sharp breath before turning round, her features again a mask of indifference. There was a second knock on the door. Attend that, Bellingham ordered. Bonjour. It was Marquis de Lafayette. As I opened the door, uh, though only 20 years of age, Marquis was said to be one of the richest men in France. He volunteered to help the American cause and had become a favorite of General Washington and Mrs. Greene, for he was handsome, charming, and a wee bit devilish, which made for good gossip, as all the ladies in camp were fond of him. Good evening, sir, I said. It is indeed. He handed me his hat and gloves and hurried past me to the dining room, where he was greeted with cheers of assembly from the company. I set his hat on the shelf by the door and laid his gloves flat next to it. Then I followed him, taking up the wine bottle from the side table as it passed. Isabel had disappeared into the kitchen with the tray of dishes to be washed. I poured the Marquis a glass of wine, which he lifted up. Montijo, you must hear my news, he said. His Excellency has appointed me to lead a battalion and hunt the British. Bellingham lifted his glass. Huzzah! May you thrash them soundly. The entire company toasted the sentiment, and I was kept busy refilling their glasses. Which companies are you leading? Asked the fellow who so loved the biscuits. All of Poor's brigade, and Maclean's men, and the Oneidas, some 2,000 fellows in all. He could not help but grin. I can tell you I am most honored by His Excellency's faith in me. Mrs. Green said something quickly in French that made the Marquis blush. No, madame, he answered, it is not the same as leading the entire army. That is a privilege of General Washington alone. My forces tomorrow will provide only a prelude of what is to come. Tomorrow, Mrs. Green fluttered her fan. Oui, he sipped his wine. That is why I come so late to your lovely dinner, and why I must leave so soon. I took my place by the door, hoping that no one could see that I was shaking. Tomorrow is our last chance to run, our only chance.